This video will give you information about the characters in Great Expectations who are convicts, as well as review important parts of the plot involving these characters and provide some historical background about the time in which the novel is set and was written. So first, some background about the criminal justice system in Victorian England. The Victorian era in England was during the 19th century, so perhaps around 1820 through maybe 1860. Great Expectations was published in 1861. And the first point to review is the prison ships, or the hulks, which, if you didn't check out page 8 in your book, there's a section about the hulks and the convicts. The hulks were large ships without masts, which had been used in battle but had been retired and fitted out for the housing of male convicts awaiting transportation to the colonies, the British colonies, Australia being one of them. Tasmania was another colony. These floating prisons were moored near a dockyard or arsenal in order to utilize the labor of the convicts. Most hulks were moored on the Thames, which is a river, big river that goes through England, at Woolwich or at Portsmouth. Pip lives closer to Woolwich. The practice began in the 1770s and continued until 1856, 4 years before the writing of Great Expectations. Conditions on these floating jails were allegedly wretched, with disease and death rampant. Despite numerous outcries to reform the system and build new prisons, the British government instead continued to search for new places to send convicts. The transportation was a common way of dealing with England's worst offenders. Convicts were routinely transported to the British colonies in America until the Revolutionary War, and then to Australia and Tasmania. The sentence was occasionally for a specified period of time, 7 years, for example, but increasingly the sentence would be for life. The conditions for the transported convicts were similar to those for slaves being shipped to America. Many died during the 4 to 6 month journey, and many more were ill or dying when they arrived in the colony. Those who survived were set to work as servants or laborers for the settlers. Some transported convicts were able to work hard, save money, and become settlers themselves or return to England. Those who failed to be reformed, however, were sent to penal colonies where they were chained, whipped, and set to hard labor for the rest of their lives. Eventually, however, transportation of convicts became expensive, and the legal settlers complained about having to receive the criminals. The British government then began to look at other ways of dealing with convicts, and a new period of penal reform and prison construction began. New South Wales is the region of Australia where Magwitch had been living prior to returning to England to reveal himself as Pip's benefactor, which occurred in chapter 39. The center picture just shows an example of a leg iron that was detaining Magwitch in the first chapter. The early chapters when Pip meets him, he had to file through this, which is why he needed a blacksmith's file from Pip. And this is a scene of a hanging which occurred outside of Newgate Prison. And Pip goes to walk through Newgate Prison with Wemmick in one of the recent chapters. And some of the clients that Jaggers would defend would be housed in Newgate Prison. This was a very dirty, grimy, crowded, and notoriously wretched prison in London. So who are these convicts? Well, the most important convict to know has several names. We first know him as Convict 1 because he's unnamed in the beginning chapters of the novel. In chapter 39, we learn he is Pip's benefactor, the one who bestowed upon Pip his Great Expectations and has been funding Pip's life in London. And his real name, his birth name or his Christian name, is Abel Magwitch. Often in the book and in the rest of the unit, he'll just be called Magwitch. Provis is the name Magwitch took on as an alias while he was traveling when he was living in New South Wales and then returning to England. And Sometimes Pip, when he's trying to conceal Magwitch's identity, he refers to him as his uncle, so he might call him Uncle Provis. This is some overall information about Magwitch. Just reviewing which chapters he's been in. You're very familiar with chapter 1, which we read in class, where Magwitch is first introduced. He's the second character in the novel introduced after Pip. And Pip is 7 years old when he meets Magwitch in the churchyard. And then in chapters 3 and 5, Pip delivers the items to Magwitch, and then Magwitch is caught and returned to the hulks after fighting the other escaped convict. In chapter 39, of course, the big reveal, Pip, I've made a gentleman on you. And one other detail that connects characters is that Jaggers was Magwitch's lawyer for Magwitch's trial, which is why Jaggers was the one who delivered the information to Pip about his expectations and why he was Pip's guardian and the holder of Pip's finances. So there's this connection now that we know between Magwitch and Mr. Jaggers. Magwitch is going to continue to be a very significant character throughout the rest of the novel. Convict number 2. This convict is not named. And the first time we see convict number 2 is in this scene depicted where he is fighting convict 1, Magwitch, out on the marshes. In fact, he's introduced in chapter 3 right before that, but this is the first scene where he has any dialogue. In chapter 3, remember, Pip mistakes this convict for convict number 1, who we now know as Magwitch, when delivering the food and file, and this convict is described as having a bruised face. And when Magwitch hears this convict has also escaped from the hulks, he says he will pull him down like a bloodhound. In other words, he will find him, go after him, get him at all costs with intensity. Then shortly thereafter in chapter 5, when Pip accompanies others to look for the 2 escaped convicts, he finds Magwitch and convict 2 brutally fighting on the marshes. And convict 2 tells the soldiers that Magwitch is trying to murder him. And it's clear to us that Magwitch does not want convict 2 to escape without arrest. He wants him to be arrested and dragged back to the prison ships. Since chapter 5, convict 2 has not been in the novel and is not named. However, chapter 42 will reveal more about this convict. Convict number 3. This is the convict who Pip meets at the Three Jolly Bargemen, which is a pub in Pip's village where Pip would go with Joe and others such as Mr. Wopsle to drink and talk, smoke a pipe, read the newspaper. So this is a picture of Joe and Mr. Wopsle and a young Pip and this stranger who is stirring his drink with Joe's file. These events, which I just described and were portrayed in the previous picture, occur in chapter 10. And at this time, this convict is just a mysterious stranger who is looking for Pip. And Pip describes him as one of his eyes was half shut up, as if he were taking aim of something with an invisible gun. And that's one of the physical characteristics Dickens provides about this convict. This convict delivers to Pip 2 1-pound notes, so some money. And he has, again, Joe's file and stirs his drink with it, which connects him to convict number 1, Magwitch. This convict appears again in chapter 28, when Pip, traveling from London to his village back out on the marshes in the stagecoach, he's seated in front of these 2 convicts. Convict number 3 is recalling the last time he was in that village, which was to deliver the money to Pip during Pip's childhood, which we learn Magwitch sent him to do. And this is addressed on page 214. This convict is never named. Convict number 4, also an unnamed convict, and this is just the second convict in the stagecoach with convict 3. And he listens to convict 3 tell of his delivery of the 2 one-pound notes to Pip. This convict is not named and is not important to the plot. So hopefully that clarifies the difference among these characters and reviews some of the plot of Great Expectations. So read chapters 42, 43, 44, and 45 over the weekend to learn more about the convicts.